Okay. Okay. Jos joku haluaisi mennä Twitteristä poimaamaan linkin, yritetään striimata YouTubeen tämä. So I'm trying to stream this to YouTube.
Okay. You can use also this maybe teleport, the Twitter streaming stuff.
The Periscope.
The Periscope and teleport. Next step is teleportation. Honestly, it's just Periscope.
What is going to happen here?
Sit down and you'll see.
We're gonna drink coffee. Refuel.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. So we're live on the internet and it's ready to go.
Okay. So, well,
congratulations to those who managed to come here today. Apparently it was not that easy logistically. So I'm happy to be here for another type of presentation than yesterday. So I don't know if you were yesterday at the seminar. So here the idea is to less talk about the scientific work, but more like at the interface with art at the beginning to start the day like freshly, and also to do a more practical workshop with data that I made open with a friend artist, so that we can discover some new stuff. For instance, beads, which is like a system for brain imaging datasets to make it open, and I can show you also how to use MNE Python, Python library to do MEG and EEG analysis. So for those who were not here yesterday, so my name is Guillaume Dumas. I work at the Institut Pasteur in Paris, and until now I'm mostly concentrated on neuroscience of social interaction, which is like, as Pfeiffer and colleagues put it very well, a kind of dark matter of neuroscience, because most of the study have focused on one individual, and so if we search studies with two individuals engaged in dynamic interaction, there's not so much going on for technical reason, but also theoretical reason, like basically with the cognitivism stating the brain as a computer. Initially people focused on individual brain, not taking the social interaction as constitutive of cognition itself. And until now, I mostly focus on how to operationalize pragmatically the study of social interaction by either dual EEG recording, so hyperscanning EEG, either modeling of brains in interaction, so like dynamic social cognitomics, and at the crossroad of the two, to have like humans interacting with computational models that we call the human dynamic level. And the biggest work achieved to date is to have demonstrated that during social interaction, in absence of external stimulation and metronomes, the two people interacting and predicting what the other are gonna do and anticipating the movement leads to synchronization between their brain activity. And as I explained yesterday, the major challenge here is that we are measuring many factors in parallel.
So you mean that they're predictive of each other? So in that sense, in synchron?
Yeah, so basically in my case, it was a spontaneous imitation task. And what I mean is like by being imitating the other mutually, they are kind of bidirectionally coupled, and since they are mutually anticipating the movement of the other, they manage to enter in a state of synchronization.
Yeah, okay.
But in absence of a single external cue synchronizing their two brains, here they are both stimuli and responder simultaneously.
I asked it because synchronization can mean so many things. So
Yeah, sure. But the tricky thing is that initially when I tried to publish that, it was kind of complicated, because indeed there are so many things going on behind that, and it can be misleading in the first place to see those links, because there is no physiological link between the two brains. It's just a way to show the similarity between them. But there is like a sandwich of many layers that are responsible of this similarity at the dynamic level. From the neurobiology similarity between the two brains, the fact that they do the same task, in my case it was like hand movements, but also the fact that they have a cultural similarity. So like Kitayama or Andreas Robbenorf study, like in a given culture, the same social task would not lead necessarily to the same brain activity. So that's also a question about the normativity we have in neuroscience. And also, it measures exchange of information, be it unidirectional or bidirectional. And the interesting thing, because I like not linear causality, is that it is through our similarity that we manage to communicate and help us to communicate, but it's through communication that we also frame our common ground and culture, so that there is a kind of bidirectional relationship between those two things that we measure. But so like behind this similarity are all those factors. But so that was just like the, usually it's the opposite. I do a little bit of cooperation with artists, and then I speak about science. Here it's like just to set the stage for the scientific part, and I would speak a bit about what I do also on the side. So as Tommi told yesterday, in parallel to my research, I also co-founded an association called Hack Your PhD 5 years ago about the concept of open science. And at that time, the leading aspect of open science was open access, with especially Public Library of Science Plus, that kind of break the statu quo in the scientific publishing and started to change a bit the landscape. But in 5 years, many things happened, from open data to citizen science. A lot of people realized how maybe the open science is a tautology, because science should be open in the first place. But the fact that there is this open science movement was kind of ringing a bell that maybe it has derived from the original value of science. And so we organized workshops, events with students, researchers, and we have also, with Célia Gruson-Daniel, who co-founded the association with me, she studied a lot from an anthropological point of view, also what's going on in this community, through interview and through analysis of social media data. So trying to understand around this concept of open science, what are the key aspects. And so basically there were like, of course, the openness related to collaboration and free sharing of knowledge. There is like the research, education, and knowledge aspect. It's open science. There's also open source and open other stuff. But here it's about research and education. And the third aspect, which is kind of important for this birth of open science, was digital technologies, like through internet and through open source software. There is like this kind of contamination of how we can share and collaborate massively suddenly. So in parallel to this opening to the society, there is also another way of opening, which is art. And so today, to make it different from usual, I'm going to speak about this kind of interaction between art and neuroscience. So, of course, I would not say that you're fully neuroscientist or fully artist, but it's like a continuum. And I tend to now understand that artists have good scientific intuition sometimes, and vice versa. But it's also two different social groups, so it's kind of interesting to collaborate with artists, because you realize that even if you're doing a bit of art, you're not an artist, you're still a scientist. But, well, I had some artistic activity for fun, first, because it's like a major drive in life to have fun. And for instance, during electronic parties and mixing videos. So initially I was more like into video. So I like also hack the the Wiimote from Nintendo. So before doing neuroscience for art, I was trying to hack those devices to make to mix in real time. And on the right, there are like my first experiment with Emotive, which is like this low-cost EEG system to mix parameters of video or audio with brain parameters. But so another motivation also for that is sharing of tools and knowledge. So through workshop, and for instance, there were like this place in Paris called CRAS Lab, which is a Center for Resources in Sensitive Art, and we had this wonderful. Unfortunately, the place burned actually, but this was like a very nice idea. So we had like this cubic room with like one face of the room was actuator, one face of the room was only sensors. Then you have like in front a screen, and on the bottom it was like a sensitive mat. And we were doing a workshop for kids, unemployed people, or students in reconversion using open source software such as like processing or pure data to sensibilize to digital technology and interface with art. So we had like even dancers or choreographer coming. And well, this kind of workshop things leads to interesting first experimentation. So for instance, here it's with pure data and open EEG. So open EEG was the first open hardware EEG. Very simple. It was like 2 channels. The logo is the GNU from GNU Linux doing EEG. And with Gérard Parésis and the Team P Lab, which was a hackerspace in Paris, they set up an experiment. Unfortunately, it's a bit dark. About EVER scanning between performer. So that was funny because it was directly related to what I was doing at that time for my PhD thesis. And on the transmission level also, there is like, I mentioned it yesterday, cinematography. That's a good medium for that as an interface. So Rita now apparently is into that. I will send her the link. So I did this movie called Phi to explain my results about interbrain synchronization, but put it more in an artistic way. And so it has like it has some success in France and in Germany for like it was a kind of homage to Chris Marker, maybe you know him from La Jetée, and also Terry Gilliam. So and another motivation is engagement. So to what extent this getting out of the comfort zone from scientist's point of view is also a good occasion to confront to engaging topics in society. So one example, for instance, is how to help, for instance, people who are disabled, or handicapped. And for instance, with Justine Convin, we had this project to help blind people in a museum to perceive colors through sounds. So we had a very nice interaction between the cognitive science of sounds, perception, synesthesia, and so on. And Justine, who was in art décoratif in Paris, was purely from a design and art perspective initially, and she did her work of a major project on how to transmit color IDs through tactile or auditive perception. Or even more engaged or so, we had like this artistic performance we did with Luc Allard called the Limbo Log. So it was a mix between neurofeedback and virtual reality. And the idea was that people were sitting in this kind of space odyssey chair, and they had
design.
The what?
Finnish design.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. It is.
It's
Yeah.
yes.
And they were like seeing a succession of photos in the virtual reality goggle picked up in function of their arousal from understood as from the EEG and alpha rhythm, so more like a very simple level of arousal. But the idea was like if the person was kind of a Zen attitude, we were like sending more like chill and Zen figures, and if the person was kind of stressed, we tried to put like more stressful figures, and like having this feedback to amplify the emotional state of the people. And the idea also was that it was on a graph of photos, so everybody doing the performance was actually living a single experience. Like it was not pre-programmed; it was completely a walk constrained by the experience of the person. And so in that case, it was also engaged in a way because we were like dealing with the criticism of marketing and publicity, like ads and so on, and how it can affect our minds. And also an interesting thing about that, so we did that in, it was 2010, and it was really the beginning of virtual reality, like the goggles there, it was before Oculus, so they were like 640 pixels by 480, so it was very bad. But the scenography and the settings made the people really think crazy thing about the system. It was very funny to see how much people were projecting toward what was possible from a neuroscientific perspective. And interestingly, for this performance, to me, the best was the debriefing with the people, because some people were believing, for instance, that the pictures were generated based on their EEG. And we're like, no, that's not possible, at least yet. Now we have like some generative adversarial networks starting to do stuff like that, but at the time it was clearly a photo that we were taking. And it even went to a point where like at some point we were like, there were like photos on the more dark, oppressive part that were taken in the catacomb of Paris, and there were like this teddy bear, and a girl had the same teddy bear when she was kids, so she freaked out completely. So that's interesting to see how the scenography and how, from an artistic point of view, you can trigger a very strong reaction. And as a scientist, where you tend to be transparent from the beginning, it's kind of tricky to judge how far you can go in that gimmickry in a way. And so here we were like clearly playing with that, but having afterwards debriefing to discuss about this with the people. And to say that also it's bidirectional, those kind of artistic performance also fed ideas from a scientific point of view. And so, for instance, working on that, I had interaction with psychiatrists, and we wrote a paper, and clearly there is like inspiration from art that come back to science. And so here it was like a very funny paper with my friend Jean Arthur about what is the consequences that we can lead with this neuromodulation technology, like neurofeedback, but also brain stimulation, to what is the place of the individuality and the autonomy and the agency of the patient, for instance, in there. And so those kind of topics actually were brought up by people during those performances. Like, but is it controlling me, or is it me controlling the device? I mean, that's a very intuitive question, but it's tricky from a scientific point of view. And so from the gimmick topic, it's actually something that obsessed me when I collaborate with artists, because in science we have a strong ethics about credits giving to previous people's work, or also about being clear about what is going on and not over sensationalize what we are doing. I mean, we try to not fall into these problems. And for instance, there are many people doing neuroscience use for art performance, and never really stating that there were like people doing that 40 years ago. And so, for instance, Alvin Lucier was a pioneer into that, like with this music for solo performer. And we did like an homage to Alvin Lucier. We actually sent to him the photos in Paris. So making the same performance as he did in '65, doing only amplification of the EEG and using the signals to do electromechanic sounds. Yes.
Comment. So I've been associating business with brain science and EEG for 4 years now. It's a long time. And so from the beginning, so people were always contacting me and trying these things, and so the regular every year, every 2-3 years, someone, an artist, typical musician, could get to make some great music about brainwaves, and so people have been excited about that and done many things so that, and of course, the know-how hasn't gathered to some certain place. So, people are excited about this. Have been excited about it before, of course, for a good reason.
Yeah, there's like a lot of phantasm about brain controlling music and so on, and
because they're waves, and musicians love waves, sound waves,
clearly
brain waves. You just modulate these waves and make music.
And discussing also with musicians, it's more like also sometimes the idea of the interface to exploring a new way of controlling the sound. Like they like to have like knob stuff, and like having the idea of directly controlling through brain waves is also very tentative for them. But so behind that, indeed, the thing is that, as I say, usually scientists tend to have ethics about not over-sensationalizing their work. And sadly, I would say that the publish or perish or the actual war of social media and so on leads to crazy headlines now. So like, for instance, I pick up this one, which was like maybe the best, like a thought control gene switch. So basically they completely over-sensationalized the thing, but the idea was to have a classical brain-computer interface, 0-1, and then they had these mice with like a optogenetic LED, and basically that was it. But so indeed, that's like the artist, you can frame it in a really amazing story, and a lot of people buy it actually. And so the other one was this mind-blowing telepathy. Basically, it was a TMS linked to the same 0-1 brain-computer interface. So as a reaction with friends, like Gérard Parisi, but mostly Emmanuel Rebu initially, we did this Dadaist kind of art piece called the Neuro Switch, which is like a reductio ad absurdum, one BCI to control them all. So the idea was to have a BCI controlling an electric plug, and so people can control everything they want. So you can plug your LED for the mice, you can control a toaster, you can control a TMS system if you want. But to question the people, because indeed they are like, oh yeah, it's a thought control stuff, but it's a thought control switch in the first place, and it's known for years. So it's interesting how this critical thinking is completely cancelled out by the rhetoric and the way you present the thing.
This is a good example where you can define 2 states. This is what you can do.
Yeah.
So if you can define 3 states, you can do many things.
Oh yeah. But so the problem is like most of the people would be receptive to the framing of 2 states doing something like a skateboard, a drone, and so on. But if you say them, we moved from 3 states to 4, maybe it's too abstract for them. While the real challenge is that to improve the number of states you can detect and how reliable and robust it is, indeed.
And there's clearly like, from these kind of transferring thoughts from one head to another, because that's how it's in the press. And then I remember I had to kind of clarify about many a blog and Facebook post kind of explaining what exactly is going on, because it's, of course, people, if you go outside neuroscience, you don't know what you read, what the EEG measures from your head, for instance. You don't know what that data is, what you can, you know, what can we deduce from that. Like, it's basically like, okay, someone's reading someone's thoughts because they're doing this. Like, I mean, and if that says on the paper that they are reading thoughts and then implanting them on another mind, then that's basically what people believe. And then you have to say that, well,
it's not that
you
easy.
know, it's just like, you know, 2-state thing that you get from the EEG.
Yeah.
It's not the thought. It's basically that someone is thinking about, let's say, maybe motor activity, because it's very easy to pick up.
Yeah.
So the BCI part on reading stuff is just basically you're doing totally unrelated. You are not sending your hello. You're just sending
I try to move my right hand.
You're sending bits, and then there's this computer that translates those bits into the hello, and then again, like when it goes to the TMS, it's again like it's like ones and zeros, and then as a result, you can get that same. So they're kind of, you're not thinking hello and then getting hello, but you are getting kind of individual bits, and it's kind of interesting and it's fun and it's cool that someone's built the system and all that, but it's not really like what lots of people think it is, because that's how it's been solved.
Exactly.
But if you're a professional neuroscientist, you might see these things also like simple, when like for the general public it's maybe not so simple, and it is kind of magic, like we have invented magic, just crude magic, it doesn't work so well, but like
Sure.
Yeah. No, but what I mean is like
it's nothing at the level that it's being sold at. So in that, like it's,
and especially it's most of the time also brought as something new. And as you said, I know neuroscientists who were experimenting this kind of idea of using a phone line to transmit state of BCI 20 years ago. So it's not like that new actually. But well, we are living in a busy world, and to have discussed once with a journalist where I was explaining very really what's going on, she was like, yeah, but you have to make it appealing to people, and I was like, but appealing is not lying. And it's crazy how sometimes the people doesn't really understand that sometimes make it understandable is not cutting from the truth, but it's a fine line that maybe some journalist doesn't really get or doesn't want to see, and sadly, yeah. So to finish with that, also another good motivation to collaborate with artists is the interaction. So like for instance, I have a friend, Olivier Goulet, who's a painter, and I had the chance with him to paint for the first time ever in my life. Well, the kindergarten doesn't count, but like we did that, for instance, this painting together. So artistic representation of the brain with like the grounding in the organic, and this close-up on the upper right, which is like the interface with the culture, with like the symbols and this kind of experience to share with the artist, painting, discussing, and so on. Also, it's very valuable. It stimulates a lot of ideas, and this is something really nice. And so to finish, and then we can move to the workshop. The two last crazy art projects I was involved in. First is Cogito by the artist Daniela De Polis in Rotterdam. So Daniela has been working with radio telescope for years, and doing, for instance, moon bounce, so using the moon and using the radio telescope to either communicate with places on the other side of Earth, behind horizon, from a radio amateur perspective. So you use the moon as a reflector. You can also moon bounce with yourself, so the signal go to the moon and come back. So she had like this very nice performance with kids drawing, where like they scan the drawing of the kids and they do moon bounce and they reconstruct the drawing and give back to the kid by saying like virtually your painting went to the moon and came back. So that's very funny. And here, like inspired by the golden records, these golden plates that has been sent with Voyager. So Carl Sagan, for the story, put some EG on these golden records, and even more romantic, actually, the EG on the golden record is the EG of his wife, and before they were actually together, and the story say that it was during the golden record that they fall in love. So that's very romantic story. But so in the case of Daniela, we have the idea of also transmitting EEG into space. in the idea of, that's why she called it cogito, I would say, to have the facing the silence of space, like Pascal would say. And so she started to do that with the, I think it was the Muse, EEG Muse. And she came in Paris at the workshop. We had like this brain control club with a friend. It's like a club for students to do do-it-yourself neuroscience and so on. And we had discussion, and I was very enthusiastic with the project, and Stephen also. And we were like, we had to make it, but really, really well. Like not just sending noise, but designing a protocol to encode the EEG in a way that it's going to be demultiplexed if someone receives it. And so it was a very funny project. It was completely crazy, of course, to send EEG into space. But
I like this idea a lot, because so one field I believe that scientists and an artist could be in a very fruitful way interact is, of course, conceptual arts. Because so this is what we are doing all the time. And sometimes personally, I've been not very happy with the conceptual arts made by just pure artists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go to the details.
Yeah.
Totally see the point. This is a wonderful idea, and I'm so sending good vibes to the space.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful idea.
No,
so, and if you allow me, so I have another comment. So, which I thought a lot. So when we were doing brain-computer interfaces with MEG and EEG, something like 15 years ago. So. At that time, I became intrigued with the idea that, so why don't we actually code the EEG to sounds? Because auditory system is very sensitive to different features of the sounds, and you might actually find, by listening to the EEG, some features which could be very useful for brain-computer interfaces.
Yes.
I suggested this to my students because I couldn't do that by myself, but they didn't believe that the idea is good. The why actually, so you have a signal, which is a nice signal. Why to make it something else? So, but the point is that because of auditory system, so it might be a good idea, and it would be nice if someone would try it. Or
so I've seen a couple of experiments like that for detection of epileptic seizure, for instance.
Yeah.
So it's a good way of by listening, you can hear the sound of the epileptic seizure, that kind of stuff.
Good. Yeah. So if I would go back to that,
I can make you a demo of the sounds of our protocol, because so the idea with this, so this is me coding late at night on the side of the Dwingelo radio telescope. So it's a approximately 30-meter dish in the north of Holland. It's very nice place. It's called Astron. It's the Radio Astronomy Center, a European center. And I must say that I met also crazy nerdy people there. Like there is like the new head of the gigantic radio telescope there, Paco Palomer. He was there when we went once for making tests. Now he's the head of the one of the project. And so this guy operates a system that use interferometry between all the radio telescopes on Earth that are connected to this place lost in the middle of Netherlands. And through interferometry and huge computing facility, they can emulate an antenna of the size of Earth. So it's like, he was explaining that, but wow, that's so nerdy. So there are like this kind of people there, or we had like also two radio amateurs helping us for the project, Jan and Michel, and well, that's also the good occasion to meet passionate people. And so we had like a very intense discussion about if we want to make this signal understandable by anybody, how we can make it as a Rosetta Stone from a sound perspective. And so there are like linguistic questions, there are like theory, coding theory and information theory questions. And from a project like that sounds crazy, actually, good science question popped up, like what is the best way to encode a multiplexed EEG? So yeah, I can make you a demo afterwards of the sound we end up with, because actually it has very interesting sounds. And the other project I would love to do the practical after to make some tests if you have your computer and so on, is this 101 night project with the artist Nathalie Regard. So Nathalie has been recorded and logging her dream for more than 15 years. Every night she logged what she dreamed about, and she's specialist to have lucid dreams and so on. She's painter initially, but I would say that the dreams taken part of her art as well as a performance in life. And so the project was already started with Roberto Toro, who is in my lab in Pasteur, with neuroanatomists. And with Roberto, they made the first experiment with this emotive, cheap, low-cost EEG before. And here the idea was, what about doing it with like same thing as for Daniela and Cogito? Why not doing it really, really with the best technology we have right now and doing it art project, but with valuable scientific input? And so I have this, I'm starting a platform in Paris with EGI technology, like this helmet you see on the upper left, which is like a very convenient caps for kids, especially because you can put it in like 10 minutes compared to other with the gel. And so I contact them and I say, I have this project with a friend. Is it possible to borrow you a system? But it's like it's kind of expensive. It's like 100,000 euros. So they say, well, okay, but maybe you have to go to our headquarters. So near our headquarters, they won't send it on the. Initially, Nathalie is in Mexico, so sending the system to Mexico with the custom and so on seems like complicated. And so we ended up with Nathalie. I took a flight ticket with her from Mexico and me from Paris. We met at Eugene, Oregon in the US. And we set up in an Airbnb a rogue neuroscience sleep lab. So the guys borrow us this super nice amplifier for 256 electrodes. I trained Nathalie to put the cap on herself. So it was like logistically, I had only 10 days there and I had to set up everything, make the training with Nathalie. And initially we didn't have even the idea that someone else would help her. So we had to find a way so that she can put the helmet on her own, which was completely not thought as possible from an EGI perspective with the long-term recording, like with gel. But we find a way, for instance, using this this kind of heads, putting the helmet upright, putting the gel in advance. We free up the fridge, putting the heads with the gel in the fridge so that the gel becomes solid, and then putting the gel back on the head. So that was the kind of experimentation we did there. It was very interesting, and even EGI was interested to see that kind of trick, for instance. But and so like the idea is that the deal was she gonna be recorded herself during 101 night. So not like 1001 night. It's way too much. So we cut to 101. So 3 months and logging her dreams and logging what she's gonna do during the day. So we have like a full phenomenological experience during the day and the night, plus the EEG. And on top of it, with Roberto, we designed software that we're sending words during the night randomly and sending triggers to the EEG amplifier so that everything is logged. And that's the kind of data set I would love to do a workshop after that. So we have like the 101 night data plus an XML file saying at that hour, precise milliseconds, we send that word to Nathalie. And we had the trigger on the EEG. So we can reconstruct, in a way, if a word went into the dream or not. So based on the dream log of Nathalie. So that's the data set. And the idea would be that for sleep research, it can be a good open data set because there is not so common to have one person during 3 months. And for like doing also work on perception of auditory stimuli during sleep and during different sleep stage and so on. So to conclude for this part, so like as you understood, like to me, like science and art are breeding the same kind of values and sense of wonder in a way. And so, as I say, it's like getting out of the comfort zone for sometimes, but I think it's very rewarding in the end to have this interaction with the artistic community. And that's it. So now I can show you, if you want, the kind of sounds that this Cogito how we can increase the sound. So that's the type of sound we are sending into space. So that 32 channel multiplexed in spectral domain. So we stack the spectral for each channel on top of each other, and on top of it there is a diarac indicating the start and stop of the channel, plus the XYZ position of the channel. And I'm working on a header before sending the transmission that explain kind of the protocol by moving one sound over the different sensor. So like if someone receives it, he can understand that it's space that is encoded. But so that's the kind of thing. And to show you the dream session. So this is the whole project. So the 90 days of dream were the first trial with the emotive. Oh, sorry, you don't see it. Yeah. So this is the projects of dreamstation.org, and the first trial they did with the emotive helmet was 80 nights. So you have like the 80 nights logs, so what's going on and so on the website. You have the day-by-day log, so what you do and so on during the day. There's audio log, the EEG, and also some reading she did. And Natalie made a lot of artwork from this experiment on top. So there's like this nice dream log with like drawings, EEG, and writings. And what my favorite thing is this sculpture made by Roberto. So using the EEG signals and kind of generative art, generate those sculpture, and the beauty of it is this there that's not seen. So you have like the objective representation of the brain signal, and on the bottom you have like an extract of the dream log. And so for instance here there is like reloj, the clock, and I think it's the reloj word, and they had this word sent during with audio during the night. So basically it's trying to make a dialogue between these objective brain waves with the subjective feeling of seeing this clock on the ceiling. And then there is also the fact that she published all her dream publicly, which is like kind of intimate in a way. She had like so this is the 80 dream, but she published way more dreams in books. So like there is this huge box full of books of all the dreams she made. It's very nice. And so the 101 night, we have, so I show you that. And the idea is that we took the words from this poem from White Man about the sleepers, and if you click here on the website, technically, yeah, you end up on a Dropbox with all the data sets. So we had like 2 terabytes of data shared with the community. And you have like the EEG, but all the XML files, so those are the EEG, and for the XML it looks like that. So you have like the time and the timestamp, and then the words that have been sent. So this is like in Spanish. So we did 1/3 of 1 month in English, 1 month in Spanish. To try like how it's gonna respond, because so here, like for instance, is English, and I added also a scrapping of what was going on during the day on the news, so that we have maybe a clue also how it affects the dreams. So for instance, when I was there with Natalie during the 1st day, there were like huge fires in Oregon, and the air was full of smoke, and everybody was freaking out because there were like this huge fire. And by coincidence, she was dreaming of things related to fire. So that's why also we did that. So I don't know how you want to proceed, Tommy. We can either do some, like for instance, we can download one XML and one EEG file, and I can show you with Python how to read the data, and we can document that so that people can play with the data set.
Yeah.
Yeah?
That would probably be useful.
Okay, let's do that then. I don't know if you have any question before doing more the kind of applied workshop kind.
So probably not so much a question, but so I like kind of the idea. So let's try to figure out what people are experiencing. For example, in the morning when they sort of drink their coffee and read the morning papers. And for example, so some years ago, actually, I decided that I don't want to read the morning papers because they make me feel bad. And I said this to my wife now, so listening to some of it, she became very happy. So it was like 1 year or something like that, and then we went back because of my wife. But so of course so I thought that this probably is not good for people. So they're bombarded with this very negative news, because usually it's negative news.
Yeah.
But it's not. I felt that it's not good for me. So I don't know. So if anyone has actually studied social, because of course this is available, this information.
Yeah.
So what is the net on the newspapers and TV, and also have anyone measured so on the large scale, for example, so emotional feelings.
Yeah.
Using some kind of.
For instance, like the news in the evening, to me, it's like super anxiogenic. Like people go to sleep after that, and they.
Right, and so it's evidently it has to go to your brains because it goes to your brain and mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not aware of study about that, but for instance, like that could be funny to have like positive news and negative news and see how it impacts the quality of sleep of people afterwards. So like that kind of thing. But I'm also like you. I don't have TV for more than 10 years now, and I try to read more like poetry than see news on the evening to sleep. So.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah,
I think the level of on a tangent from what Nick said, but this level of subjective experience is something that we should take more seriously as scientists.
Yeah.
I think that's a massively, like it's almost like stating the obvious, but it's if we look at what psychologists and neuroscientists, what we usually do is basically try to kind of control for subjective experience. So we try to make everyone kind of come to the same situation, do the same thing, so that the subjective experience would be somehow controlled and similar or ignored. completely, and I think that's not a good way.
So psychology, the whole psychology was about, but so then perhaps there was an unfortunate change in psychology. It became more scientific or whatever, and cognitive neuroscience.
Kind of flipping to the other side.
But I strongly agree. We should. So this is what we should study: subjective experiences and trying to explain them.
And it's a hard problem. It's a really hard problem.
Yeah, that's what we discussed yesterday. That, for instance, in fact, philosophy, you have like these analytical philosophers that are super efficient for cognitive neuroscience because they are really good at framing concepts and having robust ways of trying them and so on. And meanwhile, you have also the phenomenologists, philosophers who are interested in this subjective experience, and they are often criticized by the analytics as more fuzzy and so on. But it's a way more complex topic, I would say, to frame the subjectivity and understand it. And of course, you can be eliminativist and say this is too complex. We're going to focus on something that is simple. But I'm glad that some people maybe it will take more time, but the project is valuable to understand, and having a proper, rigorous way of dealing with subjective experience and how to study it.
So we have so trying to go to this direction. For example, so let's say people are so listening to narratives. For example, then we stop the narrative every now and then, and so then ask people to report their associations. Because of course, the people listen to the narrative always. Individual people listen to the same narrative in individual ways.
Yeah.
Of course, at certain level, so they listen to the same story. It's clear because so this is what language is. But then we have this kind of individualistic feelings, and so this is the tricky thing. Very good.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about other. So, like for instance, in our lab, for instance, we are working a lot on autism, and also understanding the subjective experience of patients is really important. Like, of course, we are interested in my boss is a geneticist, and we are interested in the mechanism behind autism. But meanwhile, interacting with psychiatrists and patients themselves, if you have a cold understanding of the mechanism, it's not the only thing that would help them to have a well-being in their life. It's also understanding what they are experiencing and how to better account that.
It's about accepting that, so we have this level, which is legitimate and very important in human interaction. So you cannot explain it out. It will be there.
Yeah.
So we need special terminology for this level.
Yes, and sadly in France, there is this like polarization between psychoanalytic approach and more like biological approach. And to me, like the truth is in the middle. Like you have to acknowledge the individuality and of course not dehumanize the relationship with the patient and so on. But meanwhile, it doesn't prevent you to have a grounding in biology and be evidence-based. So that's the thing that I see in France, that this polarization is either you are like denying the objective grounding of the pathology and you are focusing on only the subjectivity of what's going on, or you are like in the, but yeah, as always, the truth is in the middle.
It's difficult. So how is it? So a friend of mine, so Olivier Bertrand from Lyon, so he's the head of the brain imaging center. So he said to me that so he feels that actually psychology, so real psychology is not very highly appreciated in France, so to say.
Okay.
So how you think of that? So it was not his opinion.
Yeah. Well, there is a clear cut between what is called clinical psychology and research psychology. And you have like research psychology is experimental psychology in a way, and clinical is more psychoanalytic.
Okay.
And this
is what he means.
Yeah, and this cut is really terrible for patients because you can a lot of clinical psychologists are not even taught in school about experimental psychology and how you can have evidence-based approach. And so that's, I think, it's the root of the problem. You have this clear cut between the two. And even in the common language, people have difficulties, I think, in France to dissociate what a psychoanalyst is from a psychiatrist, from a psychologist. Like for a lot of people, it's fuzzy, the differences. Why psychiatrist is a MD and the two other not, for instance. But those boundaries are very fuzzy for most people. And yeah. So, okay, so the thing is that it's gonna be long, 1 hour for downloading the datasets. So we have like 101 times 6 gigabyte data. What I can show you meanwhile maybe is the...
Just one question related to this topic we were discussing just now. Because I would be really interested if there has been any like ethnographic accounts about this being a subject in an experiment and also for the experimenter or scientist.
Yeah.
It would be really nice to know what, especially what a scientist is thinking, why they are making their hypothesis and how they reflect on their own experiences on that. But I haven't not like run into any.
Spontaneously, the thing that come to mind is more on the participant side. It's called the explicitation interview. It was developed partially by Francisco Varela with Pierre Vermersch and Nathalie Despraz, and also Claire Petit-Mangin worked on that. I followed courses from Claire on the technique, so it's inspired actually by psychoanalytic techniques of explicitation, of how to make the person talk about what's going on. But they narrow down at the basic pragmatic level to have some tools to dig into the subjective experience of a very small amount of experience. Like I remember well during Claire's course, for instance, you make someone think about a location, for instance, and then you say, no, finally, I want you to think about an animal. And so, like, okay, so it's a very simple thing. It's like conversation analysis. Mm-hmm. Then you go back and you say, what happened when I say, no, finally, you have to thought about an animal instead of a location. And the person say, well, I was a bit surprised, and then I thought about this frog. And you say, okay, so you were surprised, but how you were surprised, and so on. And you dig into explicitation of what the person experienced. So that's really tricky because from a rigorous point of view, there is like the Damocles sword is the introspectionism in the past, where like people can confabulate and invent things that they didn't even experience afterwards. But the idea is that if you have sufficient accounts like that, you can start to make statistics and also extract patterns of what's going on from a subjective point of view. So there are attempts to develop this kind of micro-phenomenology techniques to decipher what's going on at the subjective level. From experimenter protocol and stuff, there is also, I know in psychology, a lot of work on the Pygmalion effect and how expected outcome from the experimenter affects the behavior of the participants. And that's a basic flow in psychology. Sometimes if you don't do double blind, you can actually impact the results of the things even unconsciously without telling the person. But yeah, so that's the Pygmalion effect. Yeah. So I can show you the software. So it's called MorphEG for Morphis. I took So yeah, here was the software. So Natalie was starting that at the beginning of the night, and you can change how many stimulation you want per hour. So if I do that, it's gonna be 60 per hour.
Female, married, bending, sleep well, dying, enraged, married.
And so that you have this stimulation coming during the night, and all is stored afterwards into a XML file. So that's what you can download. So I programmed that with the Open Framework, which is like a very nice open source framework for C++. So if you have like a question on that, I can help. So Natalie also provided all the anatomy. She made a MRI before. So our friend Roberto actually even put it online. So you have like this project from Roberto called Brainbox. It's they won the Open Science Prize last year about that. So the idea is to have a kind of Wikipedia for imaging data. So you put a MRI URL, or you upload one, and then you can use it. Like for instance, if you want human, a lion. Let's see. Let's take the lion. And so you just log in even with your GitHub account, and the cool thing is that you can collaboratively annotate brain imaging data. So apparently it's really a pain. I'm doing more EEG, I don't do MRI, but it's a pain to segment and annotate MRI, especially for large cohort when you have like thousands of brains to annotate. So here the idea is to have a tool to do it collaboratively. So you do a quality check and stuff like that, and you have even a chat, so you can spend hours chatting and segmenting your favorite brains. And so he did also that for the brain of Natalie, so brain of a dreamer. And the interface is pretty neat, so you can change the slice, you can annotate it. There are ways of drawing directly like that. Well, it's like paint for MRI. And you can change, of course, the slice and so on. So all the data with the EEG are available. Yeah, also play with the Fitbit. Yes. So let's see how it goes with the download. Doesn't like to download 6 GB. So fortunately, I have a simple data set here, so we can make a little try. Oops. I don't know what kind of software you are using for the analysis here. It's mostly MATLAB or Python also for the MEG and EEG.
Well, we use Python.
Yeah.
Python.
And so you use the MNE?
So we, we're developing technology mostly for the people that might be using MNE, and I think there's many of them are actually using MNE, and that's what we're aiming to be compatible with.
That's good.
At least. I mean, of course, you want to be compatible with pretty much everything, but that's not the main target.
So. Let's try to.
Sisters, light.
Ah, yeah. Then you can freak out if you forget that the thing is running on the back. So yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar with hydrogen. You use Atom, you know Atom, the editor. So if you are like using Atom, I highly recommend this plugin called Hydrogen. It's like having a Jupyter notebook inside your Atom directly. So it's pretty convenient because you can write your script and execute the code inside the Atom. So, for instance, and you have let's see if it works. We have too much things running simultaneously. Classic.
So I tried this hydrogen thing some time ago and it wasn't working very well. Working well these days, or?
Me, I'm working most of the time with it. The only problem I have, for instance, is like for interactive visualization. So basically generate a PNG like for Jupyter Notebook. So if you have like Qt with like sliders and buttons and stuff, this doesn't work well. But except for that, if you do a classical PNG or PDF output, it works.
But probably. So if you use the Qt backend, it doesn't open the window. Or?
I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the only limitation I have. So I don't know. It's very laggy. So maybe it's the data I have here is not. It's segmented already. That. Okay. So sorry, for that it's gonna be a bit. So well, while it's loading, also the other stuff I wanted to pick and maybe geek on this dataset. So we made it open, and for Natalie to be more convenient, we put all the data on the Dropbox. So she had already by day a lot of things to manage for the routine, cleaning the cap and so on. So I didn't want to bother her with like doing SFTP transfer and so on. So we took a simple Dropbox. But the next step would be to use these beats. So I don't know if you heard about these beats. It's a brain imaging data structure. So it's an idea of organizing neuroimaging data in a very standardized way, so to help people to use other data sets. So they have a clear description of how you can organize your file and describe the protocol, etc., so that then you can have scripts that can run more easily on different data sets without having to spend so much time to understand the psychology of the person who recorded the data set. This was mostly designed for MRI and fMRI. So there's a lot of development that have been done for that. But there is also MEG bits, and now it's MEEG bits. So like apparently Sylvain, Robert Ossenfeld and Cyril Pernet as well, or Guillaume Rousselet, I think, are working on that. So you have like a Google Doc with this proposal for bits for magnetoencephalography and one for EEG as well. And I think it's a good idea that the community share a type of standard to describe this protocol, because there is so much data generated by so many labs, and now that people are more at ease with sharing their data, as I say yesterday, it's not like putting the data on an FTP, it's also make it usable by others. Having a zip file with raw data in a pile of data like that, it's not useful. And so they are like really also raising interesting points about reproducibility. So even within the same lab, I don't know, here for instance, if you have like data from 10 years ago and you want to look back to those data, it can be very tricky in a way. So having a standardized way of describing the data set so that you don't have to think too much. Actually, it's already filled the holes in the form and so on. That's a good thing.
It's a very good thing, and of course we have discussed about this good thing for years or 10 years, and probably even now we are going. So we should.
So you have your internal kind of organization for the data set and so on. That's interesting. So there is like a global file for the bits data structure, and I must say that it's amazing how self-organization leads to a super nice standards. Maybe it's because neuroscientists are very good at collaborating on Google Docs, but I was really agreeably surprised of the outcome of this. And there is still a lot of work for the EEG and MEG part, because the thing was really pushed by Chris Gorgolewski and people from MRI community. And so knowing here you have like a lot of MEG and EEG, that could be also something you would be interested in. Yes.
And then the interesting question is then, like there's so many different manufacturers of devices, and all manufacturers have a slightly different output, so the kind of the bits question then becomes like which model to follow, and you know, even like what do you call the MEG head position monitoring.
Yeah.
These different vendors have a different like
convention,
like different conventions, just different names. And so if you have a data set that has at some point has this HPI, then like every electrolysis knows that this is okay, this is the head movement. And then everyone else is like, what? What does this acronym mean? And it's kind of those type of really practical questions. And then of course kind of getting your data from your format to the bits format is
it's not that easy.
It's not a trivial issue.
Not a trivial, yeah. I tried to start for the 101 night datasets, and there are a lot of questions because you realize how it's hard to find something that one fit all format. Because, for instance, in this case, it's one subject during 101 night, which is totally uncommon.
Yeah.
So. But for instance, yesterday we were discussing with Enrico of the multicentric studies. So for instance, here also there is like reflections and people trying to understand what would be the best solution to do multicentric recordings and have in the format something that help to not solve but at least reduce the problem of heterogeneity of maybe it can be anything. It can be even the temperature of, for instance, in Helsinki, it's way colder than in Mexico, and maybe it could have an impact on the sweating and the way the brain waves react on EEG, for instance. Those kind of things are totally implicit in normal method sections of papers, while in fact it's kind of, if you want to really do reproducibility in science, you need to account those things. I've been familiar with that because the molecular biologists in Pasteur are really, really sensitive to these kind of things, because like for the temperature, it impacts the kinetic of bacteria and all those stuff in molecular and cellular biology. So if you have like someone doing the experiment in tropical environment, the outcome going to be totally different. Yes.
There's now with efforts to try to reproduce classic psychological experiments like behavioral stuff in these multi-center studies that you have like 10, 15, 20 labs kind of collecting data on basic psychological effects. You get the same kind of questions like, okay, so what's all the having to standardize everything kind of leads to people to kind of really start thinking like, okay, yeah, you need to, but there's so much that's not mentioned in the method sections. There's so much that's kind of just everyone is doing it their way, and then that's
exactly,
a big effect. Especially, it doesn't even have to be like on this very kind of small priming effects and these kind of social psychology.
The Pygmalion.
You know, this kind of old people were mentioned, so people are walking more slowly.
Yeah. That's exactly the experiment for the Pygmalion effect.
Yeah. And so the even for this kind of really what we think as robust, that every psychology textbook is full of, seem to be kind of not that clear when you then.
Yeah. But so, like for instance, this open science framework provide also a nice tool for that, and their reproducibility project that were like storming after the science paper about reproducibility in psychology. They use this. So I don't know if we can access directly. But they have this. Well, Ryan Nosek was partly one of the creator of Open Science Framework, made his PhD about this question. So, but now you have like 300 pages about reproducibility there. So it's funny how the people who would use Open Science Framework would be highly sensitive to the question of reproducibility, while it's something that is a bit taboo for a lot of journals. I mean, like we try to replicate some results in autism or also in the lab on cancer research, and when you have like even big papers in high impact factor journals, and you realize that it's not that easy to reproduce the results. The editors are not so kind of making it so public. Like while it's not. I think it's of course because the journals are very sensitive to their perspective from the public. But I would say that even from at least from the scientific point of view, it's not that the people made mistake when their results are not necessarily reproducible. Like a lot of storm went with this old people walking slowly as something very personal, like the guy made a mistake and so on. But I feel like it's the way the person reacted that made it worse.
Absolutely.
And in fact, a lot of scientists had implicit bias in their design and stuff like that. And if we don't address that and the people feel like bad each time we tackle this, we won't make progress.
Yeah, I think there's like has been this confound that came the Bark paper, like or that kind of that it doesn't, because there are two totally different things. Like if your findings don't reproduce, then it's just basically that there was something different in the measurement, or it's just not a big effect. So when you do it, it was just by chance you got that effect, and then you published in good faith and all that. But it was kind of coming at a time when there were a couple of very high-profile scientific fraud cases that some people have been fabricating results, like Mark Hauser, I think, is kind of one of the biggest names there, and so it's very easy then that you get like again this kind of public sphere and this kind of at the level of popular press, then you get kind of these two things completely confused.
Exactly.
That it's like, yet another high-profile professor is found.
Yeah.
doing something wrong, and then it's very difficult not to take it personally. I think now all of this awareness raising is hopefully kind of helping disentangle these two things, that it's okay if your results don't reproduce, but
and they are also kind of good practices, so we could actually use ourselves always. For example, if we publish something or we find out something which is very interesting thing, so it would be and get it published, so probably it wouldn't be a very bad idea actually to replicate in the next experiment, and then on the top of that, so do something else. I mean, always trying to replicate yourself what you got.
Yeah.
So that would be good for all of us, and for the science. In addition.
Yeah, and that could come from the journals themselves or the funding agency, right, to create an incentive for that.
Even we could do that, just for fun.
Yeah,
for
sure.
Science.
So, like the other example that I had in mind was this power pose debates and scandals, because the Amy Cuddy, I mean, she didn't pretended to have fake anything. Like it's just like they over-interpreted their results, and this article from the New York Times is pretty good on these stories about the power pose, because like I mean, the feedback were pretty tough for her. Like she was basically destroyed from one day to another. And it's a very tricky thing, because meanwhile we cannot say that science should stop pointing out when there is flaw because of fear of personal attack feelings of the person. So people have to be educated maybe to also take less personally their results, which is hard because we are so much passionate and involved in our work, and the confusion is maybe also linked to that. But meanwhile also there is a lot of work in implicit bias and way of dealing with that. Like there are like during the review process, for instance, people are sometimes aggressive, and you can be picky and not being aggressive as well. Like so it's a very tricky topic. Well, so I don't know.
There's also like I think the paper.
15 minutes.
But we will, yeah, maybe I don't know if we can plug anything on the
I like Ethernet cable.
Well,
15 minutes. Okay.
But yeah, so for the kind of reduced, or kind of when someone says that they can replicate your results, then I think every time the original author has kind of taken that as a constructive criticism, like saying that okay, let's see what's maybe there's something different, maybe that's the thing, or maybe it's just like a small effect that we got lucky, or kind of that it's a fluke or whatever. I think every time things flow well from that, like it's like it's almost like you get bonus points for kind of positive attitude, and your kind of credibility as a researcher is just kind of strengthened if anything. But then for I think for Amy Cuddy as well, and many of the others that have been kind of at least initially kind of reacted negatively, there's this kind of negative feedback loop.
Yeah.
It kind of tends to backfire, and then now things happen on the internet, and
it can be tough.
Very easily, and then especially if you have been like I think in the power pose case, that it's been popularized, it's been kind of monetized.
Yeah, that's the thing also.
It's been kind of gone.
I think that plays a big role.
It's like the whole thing is already living.
Yeah, on its own.
Living on its own, and it's kind of it's not just like you wrote a paper, and now the paper might need like a little acknowledgement that this might not be replicating, or kind of a link to a new paper. It's like it's like a field of industry almost. Like it's a big well-known sort of psychological effects or nudges that people still use and all that. So it's
maybe also
tricky. And then of course, since the original researcher is a young female.
Yeah, that played a big role. Like in the article of New York Times, that's what they point also. Like there is a strong.
That also makes everyone kind of pile on her very easily. So there's kind of all kinds of biases and stupidity kind of going on.
But as we say also for the brain-to-brain transmission, for instance, people are also really receptive to simple stories. Like recently there were also this paper about kids making better performance dressed in Batman for boring tasks. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but indeed it's funny. Like you can imagine this experimental psychologist dressing the kid in Batman, and that's the problem is also coming from the fact that the public needs simple stories that they catch, and the fact that well, I don't remember the guy who said that, but if the brain was so easy that we could understand, maybe we would not be smart enough to understand it. So that's the biggest problem. It's like I doubt that there is a very simple way of explaining how the brain works, because it's not that simple in the end. But so yeah, I found also this is a nice also illustration that a lot of people also misunderstood this replication crisis, because they thought it was only a third of the study that were true and the 2/3 were actually lie. It's not exactly that. It's more like a size effect problem. Like the people originally reported way too large effect size compared to what has been replicated. And also the discussion is to what extent all these implicit things like the temperature between Mexico and Helsinki, those kind of things, also are responsible of these different size effects. Like to what extent there is things that are not written in the method sections that actually participates in maximizing the effect size that you're not aware of, and that kind of things. That's tricky.
All the cultural and societal effects or differences that have this kind of carryover effects.
Yeah. So I don't know. We can make a pause while it's finished to download, and for those who are interested, we can have a more geeky session after.
Yeah. So now it's at lunchtime.
Or even lunchtime. Well, so this afternoon, I don't know what's planned, but if there are people interested to discuss about that and more even stuff than talking, I'm here all the afternoon, so much welcome.
Yeah, so maybe we do that so we can thank Guillaume now and go for lunch and then come back and we can, if we want to look at it, then we can look at it later. And then otherwise it was just planned to hang out and maybe we can show
the lab also, yeah.
Because Klaus can show the Jekyll and Hyde machine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.